Welcome to Price of Admission, and here we're interviewing Lynn Shelton. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And so my first question for you is, can you just tell us a little bit about the movie, like a brief summary?
Well, the movie is about a guy named Jack who's lost his brother recently, and so he's in a pretty bad place. And his best friend, Iris, sends him up to their family getaway to get some alone time. Jack is played by Mark Duplass, and Iris is played by Emily Blunt. And when Jack gets to this remote sort of cabin on this island in the Pacific Northwest, he thinks he's going to be alone, but he ends up encountering Iris's older sister, Hannah, who's played by Rosemary DeWitt. And she's also in a kind of a funky place because she's just gotten out of a relationship. And so they have a sort of awkward, intimate evening together, and they're joined the next day. They're surprised by Iris shows up, and it just, yeah, the thing is, I can't talk about what happens in the movie because that's kind of the delight of the film. Right. It's all the little reveals and, you know, just the way the story unfolds. But yeah, suffice it to say, it's firmly rooted in the genre of dramatic comedy, and the comedy kind of comes out of the drama. So a lot of times you're sort of cringing and, oh, you know, wincing for the people and all the little mistakes that they make along the way, but you're sort of rooting for them too, I hope.
Definitely, we all felt that, like the people who screened with me just as we watched the film last night. Like, how did you come up with that story, that plot? It just blew our minds. It was just like, it came out of like left field, but it was so refreshing, you know?
I'm glad. Well, I like films that take you on an unexpected journey, and I find it's kind of rare, you know. And what I'm interested in are journeys that are unexpected but also credible, you know, believable. That you recognize the people on screen. They seem like real people as opposed to kind of cardboard cutouts of people. And I get told stories all the time. People say, oh, you know, I heard this story, blah, 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 or this happened to my sister. And stories from people's real lives are really crazy sometimes, you know, like our lives are all messy. Everybody is flawed. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all have weaknesses, you know, and so it's what makes us human, I think, is there's the messy, and it's what makes life interesting too, you know. If everything kind of happened the way that we planned or the way we sort of thought things should happen, I think it would be pretty dull. So I like to tell stories like that.
You could really tell that in like the writing of the movie itself. Like, how did you go about writing like the movie? Because like I definitely felt like there was like some storytelling elements to it. You know, like it came from like a place from home. You know, from the heart.
Well, it was a very collaborative process. So Mark actually called me. Mark Duplass called me with the idea, the initial sort of kernel of the story. He is a filmmaker in his own right with his brother Jay. The Duplass brothers make a lot of films, and they have this vault of little seedlings of ideas that might eventually turn into a movie. And they realized that since this one was based at the center on a guy who had lost his brother recently, that it was probably just a little too close for home for them to actually ever make this movie. But he really enjoyed working with me on Hump Day, my previous film, and we'd been talking about trying to come up with another collaboration together. So I really liked the idea that there were two parallel relationships in the film between siblings. So there's the brothers, even though one of them you never actually physically meet because he's passed on. He really factors heavily into the story. I like the idea that there were two parallel sibling relationships, and the whole movie ended up becoming really about that, about these, especially about these sisters. So he brought me the kernel of the idea, and then I actually invited the actresses into the process pretty early on before I had the whole thing mapped out. And I wanted to know who these characters were, and I wanted to work with the actors to get that backstory and get that sense of, I wanted their involvement in it. And so we threw around a lot of ideas, and I ended up pruning out a lot of them because, you know, only some of them were going to add up to a story. But yeah, it's just kind of this process. I don't know how to describe it. It's a very organic process, but it's nice to have the involvement of the actors too, because I'm not really a screenwriter who can sit in a room. To get their input makes it a much less lonely process for me. and I find that it adds a lot of, you know, that texture and that depth that makes it feel real, because we're all telling personal stories and kind of oversharing, and it adds that intimacy. I think that the audience ultimately, hopefully, feels with the characters. You know, the way that the film is developed.
Definitely, like the cast, just like you said, was remarkable. It's really just each character's held their own so well. Like, can you talk a little about how you went about the casting?
Yeah, well, Mark, you know, we had already worked together, and I love working with him. Love. I would, you know, can't wait to work with him again. And then Emily, I'd been sort of obsessed with since I get that way about actors. I'm a real actor geek, and I love actors. And there's this sort of list in my head of actors I would love to work with, you know, someday. And she was definitely up there, and so she was kind of at the top. She definitely was at the top of my list for this role. And I didn't know what the chances were of being able to cast her in such a tiny film, but the film took 2 weeks to shoot, which is a lot easier pitch to make to somebody who's really busy. Right. You know, come do this little movie for 6 months. You know, it's like, you know, just 2 weeks. That's all it is. It'll feel like film camp. You know, it's really different from any other movie you've probably ever made. You know, they were all told with the actors and the crew. I think there were like 16 of us on set the whole time, and I kidnapped them all, and we were up in this little remote, beautiful island setting. I mean, it was kind of idyllic, you know. So it was kind of a little bit of actually an easy pitch to make. And I was able to tell her it'll be so collaborative, it'll be so different than, you know, some of the green screen shoots you've done recently and things, you know, where there's a lot of effects, and that can be kind of grueling, I think, on an actor. So it was good timing for her.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Lynn.